Hello and welcome back to Spinalcast. I'm your host, David Stevens, and joining us today are the Carmel brothers, David and Jason. David currently resides as the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer at the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, and Jason is the Executive Director and Research Director of Movement Recovery Laboratory at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. David, Jason, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be with you, David.
Awesome. Well, as I kind of mentioned to you before we jumped on the recording today, we're really going to just ask some questions about who the two of you are, what you've been up to, your involvement in the SCI community, and things of that nature. If that sounds good, we'll go ahead and just jump into questions.
Sounds great.
Good.
Perfect. Well, David, if it's all right with you, I think the injury story might be a good place for us to start. Could you kind of tell us what happened and, what age were the two of you when it all took place?
Yeah, so I was injured in 1999. I was 26 years old at the time, and I was living in Mexico. I had just gotten into Stanford Business School and was going there in the fall, and was doing some travel in Mexico, learning Spanish.
Awesome.
And I had met some friends in Sayulita, which is outside of Puerto Vallarta. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of the day, we were playing soccer on the beach and just ran into the water to cool off and did a shallow dive. And there was a sandbar under the water, and I hit the top of my head, and I was instantly paralyzed. So C6 injury.
Oh.
And luckily my friends were there and were able to get me out of the water. And like many people who are listening today, you become a member of a club that you never thought you'd be part of. And that was on April 17th, 1999.
Well, I imagine it must have been absolutely terrifying for your friends as well. Were they able or aware or had any inclination that it might have been a neck injury? And were they being protective of that, or were they just getting you out of the water?
I think initially getting me out of the water, and then one of my friends actually had been a lifeguard, so he knew sort of what was going on, and you can figure it out pretty quickly when they touch my leg or below the site of the injury, and I can't feel it. So
right.
I think there was a realization early on that I had a spinal cord injury.
Right. Well, I'm sure that was a scary thing to experience. Well, Jason, what were you doing when you found out about the injury? Where were you and how did you find out?
I was in my very small apartment in New York City. I was a medical student, actually, at the time, a second-year medical student, and studying as medical students usually do. The information kind of came in fits and starts. He's had an accident, can't move his legs, and then they're going to fly him out to California to undergo surgery and things like that. So it was really frightening. To hear your loved one, has a severe accident like that.
So I know you work kind of in the recovery, well, clearly the movement recovery laboratory, but you work in the neurosciences field. Were you studying it when it happened? Was that already something you were working on at the time?
No. I mean, I was in medical school, so I was studying all sorts of, all the different organ systems for medicine. But it was David's accident that got me interested in the science of nerve injury and recovery. Our father is a neurosurgeon, so I wouldn't say that the apple has fallen so far from the tree, but certainly I wouldn't have become a scientist and not a scientist in this area without that.
Right. Well, and that is one of my other questions. You mentioned your father, Peter. I know he was a neurosurgeon. Do you think the injury had a particularly strong effect on him, given his knowledge of the industry and the injury?
Yeah, I do. And I think part of it is he was the first phone call that I made
Mm-hmm.
to him and to say, what do we do? And it was actually a friend of his at University of California, San Diego, who was the one we got in touch with once I could figure out that I could actually get to San Diego. And he's the one who did the spine stabilization surgery. So, my dad was really there from the beginning, sort of giving us advice as to, where to go and what to do at that time.
Yeah.
And then I think, as it went on, I spent about a week in San Diego. I had 2 different surgeries
Mm-hmm.
to stabilize my spine, and then a second surgery to remove some bone fragments. And I was there for a week, and then flew back to New York, which is my hometown where I reside now, and did my inpatient rehab at Mount Sinai Hospital. And for my dad, I think it was obviously very helpful to me to have somebody with that level of expertise
Right.
to take me through the process, and also him feeling very helpless that he couldn't do more.
Right. I can only imagine, especially when it's been your profession. And I don't know. I think there's this level of thought that it's never going to be me or us or we that are going to be dealing with this. And so I'm sure it would hit home quite harshly. So did the injury affect your guys' relationship at all following the injury? How close were you at that time?
I would say so. I mean, as David alluded, he went to graduate school on the West Coast. I had actually gone to undergrad at Stanford, and so we had sort of flip-flopped on the coast. So I think the challenge of being a twin is trying to find your own identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in some ways we made our own decisions about which schools and where to live. But I think after David's accident, it became easier for us to be close together. We spent a lot of time together the year after his accident, and have remained very close since. And some of the, there's a sibling rivalry is part of all, relationships, but I think it was more sibling and less rivalry after.
Interesting. I appreciate that take on the situation. We've heard some stories where it can be difficult because now a sibling isn't able to do what a sibling used to be able to do, and they grow further apart. And it's great to hear that it was actually a story of coming together more so than growing apart. So
yeah, no, we definitely figured out ways to spend time together. And when I was at business school, for example, we did 2 different study trips, and Jason came on the trips with me and my classmates from Stanford Business School to both India and to Cuba. And he was there to help me out, but we got to have these really amazing travel experiences together that he definitely, that wouldn't have happened had it not been for my spinal cord injury.
Right. Well, we're actually hopefully going to be doing an episode in the near future in which we talk specifically about traveling with paralysis, and big international trips like that. I'm sure having a helping hand was really important and helpful. So so that both of those trips sound incredible, by the way. And I can only imagine the memories that were made on those trips. So let's kind of dive into the 2 of you professionally then. Based on the small biographies that I was given of both of you, you have some impressive roles and careers that you've amassed over the years. But both of you are kind of still targeting the spinal cord injury field. So could I just ask, let's start with David maybe. Do you want to just kind of explain what it is that you do with the National Institutes of Health?
Sure. So I'm at the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health.
Okay.
We're a separate 501c3 organization that's there to really support the mission of the NIH. And what we do are form public-private partnerships between the government, including the NIH and FDA, along with the biopharma industry, to really accelerate breakthroughs in really across disease spectrum. And we've been in operation for about 27 years. We've done about $3.5 billion worth of these public-private partnerships. And
amazing.
I'm the Chief Growth and Innovation Officer, which means I think a lot about sort of how we grow and in what areas we want to grow, and have really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, it's, that's another thing that keeps coming up in these discussions and interviews that we have is as much progress is being made in research, the difficulty lies in getting that research into the hands of the people who need it, or getting those solutions or those assistances into the hands of the people who need it, or the people who are experiencing paralysis on a day in, day out basis. And so the fact that you are with an organization that is working so heavily to get those things implemented in a quicker fashion, it's huge.
Yeah, no, and Jason and I also work on, through other areas to really accelerate research. So we're both members of something called New Yorkers to Cure Paralysis. We are supporting a program in New York State that has a really elegant way to finance spinal cord injury research, which is using a surcharge on motor vehicle accidents, which is the leading cause of spinal cord injury, to fund the research. So it's $8.5 million that's been flowing per year since 1998. And we are now trying to get actually an increase in that. And that funds some of Jason's basic research, but he's also gone ahead and formed a company that is hopefully bringing some of his research directly to patients.
Perfect. Well, that's like the perfect transition over to you, Jason. Let's hear a little bit more about what you currently do in your role and, what all do you have going on?
Sure. I'm a neurologist and a neuroscientist. I work at Columbia University, and I run an academic lab where we try to understand how the brain and spinal cord partner to produce movement, how that gets affected by injury, and then how we can kind of strengthen those connections using electrical stimulation. So we use laboratory animals to try to uncover the basic connections and the wiring of the nervous system, and develop new therapies in that model. Then we've been translating that, as I said, I'm a neurologist, and so we've been working in people as well, trying to understand if the similar logic of how to restructure brain and spinal cord connections is we're able to do that in people. I do have a small role in a couple of companies. One called Backstop Neural is trying to create new spinal cord stimulators that conform particularly to the cervical spinal cord in that very narrow space above the spinal cord.
Very cool. So, based on both of your roles, it seems like you're kind of hitting the problem at hand from multiple directions. And I think you both have a very unique and different insight into the SCI kind of, I guess what I would call industry, as it were. What challenges or successes have you experienced in your careers so far that you'd like to, highlight or mention? And David, maybe we start with you to keep it easy so no one's talking over each other.
Yeah, no, that's great. So For me, I've been in the biopharma industry for most of my career. So after I left Stanford Business School, I did a year as a White House fellow, working on healthcare policy in the Treasury Department. But then from there, went to Pfizer and worked at Johnson and Johnson, and then in a series of smaller, both publicly traded and private biotech companies focused in the cell and gene therapy areas. So I've spent a lot of my career taking inventions from academia and elsewhere, sometimes licensing from companies, and really forming them into companies to try to bring them to patients. So that's where I've spent a lot of my career. It's a very risky business. It's a very capital intensive business to take any of these therapies from idea to implementation.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's nothing more exciting than to try to develop something that's truly novel and bring it to people who really don't have, other options or good options available to them.
Right. What about you, Jason? Have there been any key successes or challenges that you've faced throughout your career?
Yeah, I'll give you two kind of stories in science.
Okay.
One story has been the axon regeneration story, which is actually where I did my PhD work 20 years ago. And I think the most frequent timeline that regeneration biologists give about like sort of when things are going to be ready for prime time is 5 years, and that was 20 years ago.
Wow.
So there's been lots of advances from science. I can tell you all sorts of, particularly getting laboratory animals walking and moving better.
Right.
But it's been a big challenge, and I think that across medicine, nerve regeneration or regeneration in the central nervous system has been sort of a holy grail, and kind of many people think of it as the last frontier in terms of what we're able to do in medicine.
Mm-hmm.
A more successful story has been taking the connections that exist after spinal cord injury, and almost everybody with spinal cord injury has some connections from the brain or the spinal cord above the site of the injury to below the site of the injury, and trying to use electrical stimulation or other methods to engage those weak connections, make them stronger, and give people some function back. And the sorts of function that people have documented getting back: arm and hand function, breathing, autonomic function, being able to sit, or
bladder and bowel.
So we're not there yet in terms of delivering. A lot of people will ask what a cure looks like, and to me, it's about how much function we're able to give to people with spinal cord injury. But now it's a modest amount of function to quite a few people. And we're really at the beginning of knowing how best to apply it, and the best protocols. So I think that to me is a hugely exciting thing.
Absolutely. We've actually spoken with a few scientists who have been working on the brain spine stimulation and things of that nature. With where the science has gotten to now, what is kind of the next step for you? Beyond, are you just looking to make it a more impactful connection that is being made across these, broken tethers, as it were? Or are you, where's kind of the next step going?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the work that has attracted the most interest has been in epidural stimulation. Mm-hmm. And that's really looking to boost the preserved function of the uninjured portion of the spinal cord below the injury site.
Yeah.
Our work is a little different in that we're really trying to get the brain and spinal cord to talk to each other, and engaging both the sort of go signal from the brain and the and the spinal cord that receives that signal. And so that's a sort of slightly different direction than a lot of others have. But we're eager to, we're constantly talking to our colleagues, you know, comparing ideas and trying to learn together as a community to bring function to people.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make. That's, I think, another thing we commonly hear is just this community. It is not I'm racing you to this and I'm not going to tell you anything because I want the credit. It's more like we all have great ideas. Why can't we just put all our heads together and try and get to, providing real value to patients that need it? And I applaud that, because in most industries, that's just not the way it operates. There's competitive advantages and, people trying to take angles. And it sounds like the two of you and many other scientists in the field are much more interested in a positive outcome than in personal gain. So thank you for that.
Sure.
All right. Well, I think I have one final question for you, and that's really, where do you see spinal cord injury heading now? Like the research that's being done, 10 years down the road, where do you see this field heading to? And what are you excited about? And David, why don't we start with you again?
Yeah, so I think that there's a whole host of different therapies that I'm excited to see get into patients with spinal cord injury. So we've talked a lot today about spinal stimulation, and that's definitely in the pole position at the moment. But there's also cellular therapies, there's small molecules, there's robotics and exoskeletons, which, are getting to the point where they actually should become functional for people with spinal cord injuries. And so I think all of those things are really exciting. And I think those of us in the spinal cord community really need to band together and really push for funding for progress in these areas. Because I've been injured for 24 years, and I'll say that, the last 2 to 3 years have been just a totally different situation. And I'm hoping, for me, I have come to a life that that is very fulfilling, despite having a spinal cord injury. But for the people who are newly injured, I'm really looking forward to them having a variety of options. And, it's probably a combination therapy that's going to be helpful to people.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to think about. And I'm certainly keeping my fingers crossed and, making sure that I drive Jason to spend late nights in the factory and all of that.
Well, that's just being a good brother,
That's
you got to
right.
do it. Have you ever had the opportunity to be part of a trial or any sort of treatment for your own injury?
So when I was in the hospital, I was on a clinical trial for one of the issues with spinal cord injury is bone density loss. So they had us on a drug that is used for osteoporosis called pamidronate, and I was on that study. I don't think that that's used regularly in spinal cord injury, but for me, it's a drug that had been on the market and had shown quite a bit of safety data. And so I figured that there was very little downside to participating. And
Yeah.
I think anybody who can and is willing to be in a clinical trial, I have a huge amount of admiration for, because it's putting yourself out there on a therapy that's, may not be fully proven.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way that you make progress. And so, I'd be very open to to trying new therapies that are not very invasive or other things that could potentially benefit.
Awesome. Well, Jason, what about you? Where do you see the future of research heading, and what are you most excited about coming down the road?
I'll mention one thing that David, I don't think, mentioned in his, which was pretty comprehensive. The nervous system has this really interesting property of being able to use electrical signals for communication.
Mm-hmm.
And this bidirectional communication between the nervous system and computers is one that we're starting to see being used to actually improve people's lives. We're seeing people who have either high spinal cord injury or who are locked in, controlling a robotic arm.
Right.
The most important brain-computer interfacing project has been in people who can't speak, and had used sometimes like a laser pointer mounted to the side of their head and spelling out words that, you and I can speak at 140 words a minute or so, and they were spelling words at, 8,
right.
12, 16 words a minute. So now these grids over their brain can extract the electrical signals and have them communicating like almost half as fast as people who can speak,
right.
as these people did before their injuries. So,
but what incredible progress! Even just half the speed is like remarkable, I'm sure.
Absolutely amazing, and I think that people with spinal cord injuries are going to be poised to have all sorts of interfaces with their either their nervous system or their muscles in order to understand what it is they want to do to enhance those movements, potentially by controlling a robot or by stimulating the nerve or the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this has been enabled through the computing power and the algorithms that enable us to take weak or sparse signals and make sense of them. And so I think that that's a very exciting area, and one that the sort of the merger of sort of man and machine is we're getting closer to that, and I think is something that we're going to see improvements in people's lives, within our lifetime.
Yeah, I think, David, you even mentioned, it's going to be a combination of therapies likely for people who experience injuries. And I think the general public, especially if you're like the Morton Cure Paralysis Fund and you're, searching for donations or people to be in support, there's this idea in their head that there's going to be a cure-all for spinal cord injuries. Like, I'm going to get this surgery, or I'm going to give you this pill and you'll be fine and walking again. And I think a lot of the people we've spoken with are of the same opinion, that it's just unlikely that a cure-all is going to be found in the next 10 years, but some significant life improvements are on the horizon, and quickly coming to those who need it. And so I think it's exciting to continue to hear progress from people like you who are, in the trenches every day and making it happen. And so, yeah, I think that really kind of covers all the questions that I had for today. I do want to absolutely. What was that?
I have one more thing that I think would interest your listeners. You're based in Minnesota, and one of the things that David and I have done together has been to advocate for spinal cord injury funding through the state. And so the program that he mentioned is that, puts the traffic tickets towards spinal cord injury research, is happening in Minnesota as well. And people often feel frustrated. I have someone I love, somebody I know who has a spinal cord injury. And I think that probably there's no better place for you to put your energy into than advocating. For us, it's actually been, you asked sort of what things have actually worked. After the financial crisis, New York State took the funding away, and David and I were part of a group that were able to get the money restored. And so getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, or, in New York State's case, millions of dollars a year for spinal cord injury research is an enormous source of funding and can really accelerate the field. So if people are feeling sort of, wondering what they can do for the cause, that is a really great way of getting involved.
Well, and it's a great caveat to another episode we did. We actually interviewed a gentleman named Matthew Roderick, who was
Matthew, yes.
Yeah, and so he talked a lot about that effort after his son's injury and his commitment to finding ways to get more large scale funding from the Minnesota government. So that's awesome. It's a small world when everybody knows everybody, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, well, on behalf of everyone here at MCPF, I think we just want to thank both of you for your commitment to the SCI community and the pursuit of a cure or even just treatments to make lives of people with paralysis better. Really, it's just been fantastic to talk to you. I'm going to do a quick shout out to everybody watching at home. If you're watching us on YouTube, always hit that subscribe button, like icon, or bell icon so you know when new episodes drop. Listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, you could always give us a follow. But David and Jason, thank you again for joining us on today's podcast.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, David, and thanks to everything that you do.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just happy to be part of it. I get to meet incredibly interesting people and talk about something that I have found myself surprisingly passionate about. And it's really cool to be part of something that's moving so quickly. As you mentioned, the last 3-5 years have been, I would argue, astronomical in the advancements that have been made in comparison to, when I was a little tyke running around. So it's just been awesome to be a part of it. So I appreciate that.
Thanks so much, David. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Right.
Bye, guys.